lying to you, saying nothing's going on, and it's her that he's cheating with.
Yeah, betrayal is really a devastating thing.
She stood on a balcony in Switzerland, looking down into the dark, ready to let go of everything. The woman who had outsold nearly every other female recording artist in history, who had filled arenas across 6 continents and made millions of people feel invincible through her music, was standing at the edge, alone, in silence, with nothing left holding her together. What brought Shania Twain to that moment wasn't simply a cheating husband. Decades of buried pain had finally risen all at once. A stepfather who crept into her room at night, bars full of drunk men while she was still a child, a mother swallowed by depression while a little girl held the household together, a highway collision that killed both her parents before she turned 23, and then the friend she had trusted most in the world, sleeping with the man she had built her entire life around. This is not a story about a pop star. This is the full, unfiltered truth about a woman who survived things that would have destroyed most people and turned every single piece of that pain into music that rewrote the record books. Eileen Regina Edwards came into the world on August 28, 1965, in Windsor, Ontario, and her parents split before she was old enough to form a memory of them together. Sharon, her mother, raised the girls alone until she married Jerry Twain, an Ojibwe man who adopted Shania and her sisters and relocated the entire family to Timmins, a small mining town in northern Ontario where winter temperatures regularly dropped to -30 degrees. The house they lived in was cold and underpowered, with electricity that cut out regularly and nights when the only food on the table was bread spread with mustard. Moose hunted from the surrounding wilderness and fish caught from nearby water kept the family alive through the harshest months. Moving became a pattern, sometimes 3 times in a single year, always one step ahead of landlords chasing unpaid rent. From the outside, it looked like a family doing its best against difficult odds. From the inside, something far darker was already taking shape. Sharon noticed her daughter's voice when Shania was 3 years old, and that discovery set off a pattern of long drives across frozen roads to local talent competitions, hundreds of miles sometimes, just to place a small girl on a small stage. By 4, Shania could pick out melodies on a toy guitar, and at 5 she won her first contest, a ribbon and $5. But while Sharon was nurturing a musical future, Jerry's temper was building a different kind of legacy at home. He beat Sharon regularly, sometimes in front of the children, and police responded to the house more than once without any lasting result. The family fled to a women's shelter at least once and went back anyway. Violence became the background noise of daily life, and nobody from the outside ever made it stop. By 1971, when Shania was 6 years old, she had already performed on a local radio station, but performing had stopped being only about music and had become something closer to survival. Bars full of adult strangers became her regular stage by the time she was 8, late-night shows that paid $20 each, money that went directly toward food and rent while her classmates slept. Men in those audiences grabbed at her. Some got too close. She started wearing multiple bras to hide her developing body from their stares, and by age 10 she had performed in over 100 of those venues, waking up some mornings to chop wood before school, going hungry and telling no one. Those 100 shows weren't a career milestone. They were what keeping the lights on looked like. Songwriting became her private shelter at 10 years old, a place to put the fear when there was nowhere else for it to go. One of those early songs, called Mama, Won't You Come Out to Play, was written about Sharon's depression, about the days her mother disappeared into bed and Shania quietly took over the household, cooking for her siblings and keeping everything upright. That same year, 1975, Jerry beat Sharon so severely that he pushed her head into a toilet, and Shania, believing her mother was dying, grabbed a chair and swung it at him. He punched her in the face. She was 10 years old, and that was the same year the abuse became something worse. Jerry began touching her in ways that were wrong, and she started layering clothing every single day, trying to make herself disappear. No one intervened. No authority stepped in. And the little girl kept singing because singing was the only thing that belonged entirely to her. By 13, she was performing at local events, appearing on radio programs and small television broadcasts, building something real while carrying a weight no child should carry. None of it showed on stage. She smiled for every camera and hit every note. And then in November 1987, A phone call from her sister ended one version of her life completely. Sharon and Jerry had been killed in a head-on collision with a logging truck on a highway near Wawa, Ontario. Shania was 22 years old, and the next thing she did was set down every dream she had been quietly holding and become a full-time guardian to her three younger siblings, Carrie Ann, Mark, and Daryl. She was 22 years old, and she was suddenly somebody's mother. Deerhurst Resort in Huntsville, Ontario gave her steady work from 1988 through 1993, a nightly stage in a large production show where she sang and danced and acted in front of hundreds of people, then went home to help with homework and make sure everyone was fed. 5 years of that, every single evening a performance, every morning a household to run, and through all of it, she never let go of the idea that Nashville was still out there waiting. When her siblings were finally old enough to manage on their own, she packed up and went. She changed her name, Shania meaning, I'm on my way, in Ojibwe, walked into a music industry that had no idea what was about to happen, and started knocking on every door she could find. Nashville pushed back hard. Demos got rejected. Producers told her that blending country with pop and rock would never connect with an audience, and for a while the city seemed determined to prove them right. She cleaned houses to pay for vocal lessons. She slept on floors. A producer named Noro Wilson eventually helped her land a deal, and her debut album came out on Mercury Records in 1993, selling only 100,000 copies before the industry declared it a miss. She had written just one song on the whole record and had been handed no creative control, and the music simply wasn't her. None of that mattered, though, because that same year a phone call arrived that would change the entire direction of her life. Robert John Mutt Lang, the producer behind career-defining records from Def Leppard, AC/DC, and Bryan Adams, heard her voice on the radio, tracked down her manager, and called her directly. They talked for hours. They started writing. Within 6 months they were married, and when they finally finished what they had been building together, Shania Twain released The Woman in Me on February 7, 1995, and Nashville had no framework for what happened next. 12 million copies sold in the United States alone, eventually reaching 20 million worldwide and earning a diamond certification. Those are the numbers that define The Woman in Me, and they came from an album that radio stations hesitated over and traditional fans weren't sure they trusted. Any Man of Mine climbed to number 1. Whose Bed Have Your Boots Been Under crossed over in ways nobody had predicted. At 30 years old, Shania stood on Grammy stages accepting awards from an industry that had once turned her away, and she had fought to be credited as co-producer on the record, a title almost no woman had managed to secure in country music at that time. She had spent too many years being silenced by people with more power to allow anyone to erase what she had actually built. A 1996 Rolling Stone interview captured her response to Nashville stations pulling her songs and calling her sound a bubblegum betrayal. Her style wasn't about leaving country behind, she said. It was about moving it forward. And the charts agreed. November 4th, 1997 is when Come On Over arrived, and the record books needed rewriting after that. 40 million copies worldwide by 2015 made it the best-selling album ever released by a female artist, with You're Still the One becoming one of the most played love songs of its era and man. I feel like a woman turning into an anthem that still fills rooms decades later. At the 41st Grammy Awards on February 24, 1999, she took home 4 trophies in a single evening, including Best Country Song and Best Female Country Vocal Performance for You're Still the One. The Academy of Country Music named her Entertainer of the Year in 1998, and the Come On Over World Tour that ran from May 29, 1998 through December 5, 1999 brought in over $80 million across 165 shows and 2 million fans. Elton John joined her on stage in Miami in January of 1999. The Backstreet Boys performed alongside her. For a stretch of time around the turn of that century, Shania Twain was the best-selling recording artist on the planet. Aja D'Angelo Lang was born on August 12, 2001, in Switzerland, and Shania called him the center of everything. She made his birthday cakes herself, kept life as ordinary as she could despite the wealth surrounding them, and poured a new kind of tenderness into the songs she was writing for her next record. November 2002 brought up Into the World, a bold triple-format album released simultaneously in country, pop, and international versions. the last of which carried a Bollywood-inspired sound that no country artist had attempted before. 20 million copies sold, and I'm gonna get you good hit #1 in 15 countries. But the cost was accumulating in places the public couldn't see. Her voice was showing strain. Her marriage was growing cold, and strangers had found her address in Switzerland. A man broke into her Swiss home in July 2002, stole personal belongings, and left deeply unsettling notes. A second stalker sent over 1,000 emails and appeared without warning at her grandmother's funeral in 2004. She started sleeping with a loaded gun under her pillow and hired bodyguards at a cost of $500,000 per year, and none of that felt like paranoia to someone who had grown up in a house where danger was constant and protection never came. The Up Tour ran through it all, 115 shows, over $100 million earned. But during a Chicago performance in late 2003, her voice cracked on stage mid-song. Cortisone injections got her through the remaining dates. A stage accident in Munich in March 2004 injured her ankle. She knew something was wrong in her body, but stopping had never been part of her vocabulary. May 2008 is when the last wall holding her world upright gave way. 15 years of marriage to Mutt Lange ended when Shania discovered he had been having an affair, and the person he had chosen wasn't a stranger. It was Marianne Thibault, her closest friend, the woman she had trusted with her home and her schedule and her private life for years. The person who told her the truth was Marianne's own husband, Frederick Thibault, who had uncovered the relationship and couldn't stay quiet. Shania and Mutt separated that same month, with their divorce finalizing on June 9, 2010, and Mutt stayed with Marianne. She described it later as feeling exactly like losing her parents all over again. That same complete, devastating collapse of every foundation she thought she was standing on. And it was during those months, sick and grieving and alone in Switzerland, that she walked to a balcony and stood at the edge. Her 7-year-old son Aja was the reason she stepped back into the room. What the public didn't know during any of this was that Lyme disease had been quietly working through her body since a tick bite in 2003, when she was horseback riding near her Swiss home. The disease had reached her nervous system and begun destroying the nerve connections to her vocal cords, causing microsecond blackouts every 30 seconds and cutting her voice off without warning. At 43 years old, with 100 million records sold behind her, she sat in Switzerland genuinely unsure whether she would ever sing again, going through tests, getting misdiagnosed, watching the voice she had built her entire life around disappear piece by piece while grief from the betrayal pressed down on top of all of it. The diagnosis, when it finally came, arrived too late to reverse the damage completely. She had to find a new voice from whatever was left of the old one. Frederick Thibault, broken by the same betrayal that had broken Shania, became an unexpected source of comfort in the years that followed, and that shared grief slowly became something else entirely. They married in Puerto Rico on New Year's Day 2011, one of the stranger and more quietly moving turns in any life story. That May, she released her autobiography, From This Moment On, which sold over 100,000 copies in its first week and landed on the New York Times bestseller list. She held nothing back in those pages. The childhood abuse, the bars, the car crash, the balcony in Switzerland. She wrote all of it, and readers finally understood just how much weight this woman had been carrying behind every smile and every chart-topping single. Her voice required surgery that most doctors had never performed, and on August 1st, 2018, she underwent that procedure while fully awake and conscious, singing throughout the operation as surgeons inserted Gore-Tex supports into her damaged vocal cords to help the nerve pathways reconnect. The scar on her throat is something she wears with open pride, because silence was the alternative and silence was never something she was willing to accept. 2 full years of intensive vocal therapy followed from 2018 through 2020, painstakingly rebuilding the muscle memory and breath control and note-holding ability that Lyme disease had spent 15 years taking apart. Everything had to be relearned from the beginning, and she relearned all of it. Her comeback had actually begun a year before the surgery, when Now arrived in 2017 after 15 years away from the studio. Shania was 52 years old, and the album debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 with 137,000 units sold in its opening week. the song shaped by everything the intervening years had put her through. Then in 2023, Queen of Me pushed further than anything before it, arriving on February 3rd with 12 tracks about aging, menopause, and self-acceptance so direct it startled people, debuting at #1 in the United Kingdom and selling 38,000 units in its first American week. She posed topless for the artwork and described it as the most liberating thing she had ever done, because the shame she had carried in her body since childhood, the shame of being touched without consent, of being stared at and reduced, finally had no grip on her. The Queen of Me tour that followed ran from April 28th, 2023 through November 14th, 2024, covering 75 shows across North America and Europe and earning over $114 million, with Shania Twain performing aerial stunts and costume changes at 59 years old, with more fire and presence than artists half her age. 100 million records sold, 5 Grammy Awards, a childhood defined by poverty and abuse in Timmins, Ontario. Both parents taken by a logging truck on a northern highway in 1987. A disease that spent 15 years dismantling her voice from the inside. A betrayal that pushed her to the edge of a balcony in the dark. Surgery performed on her throat while she was awake and singing. A pandemic in 2020 that stopped her heart and required emergency plasma treatment for 12 days before she came back from it. And through all of it, a voice that refused to go quiet. Rebuilt after everything tried to silence it. Deeper now than it once was, scarred and stronger for every single thing it survived. Shania Twain didn't just endure the life she was handed. She turned it into the soundtrack of a generation, and she is still singing.